You're listening to the Sustainable Angler Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Crawford. In this episode, I interview documentary filmmaker Grey Gowder, and we talk about his upcoming film project, Sea Change, which is an environmental adventure documentary that follows two American educators from Charleston, South Carolina, on a 2-year circumnavigation of the globe in a 40-foot sailboat to learn how local and international organizations collaborate with island and coastal community groups to repair and rebuild the natural systems around them to mitigate the effects of climate change locally while restoring healthy oceans globally. Hope you enjoy. This episode of the Sustainable Angler Podcast is brought to you by Emerger Strategies, a sustainable business consultancy whose mission is to solve the climate crisis by helping your business go carbon neutral and zero waste. To learn more, visit emergerstrategies.com. Hey, I also wanted to take this opportunity to tell you about the Fly Fishing Climate Alliance, which is an alliance of guides, shops, lodges, brands, and nonprofits who are committed to going carbon neutral by 2030. And we're hosting a national call-in day on Friday, October 16th for anglers to contact their elected officials and tell them that it is time to act on climate. So you can learn more about how to take action at emergerstrategies.com. All right, thanks for listening to the Sustainable Angler Podcast. I have Grey Gowder joining today. He is the director of the Sea Change documentary, which we're going to learn a lot more about today, and really excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about this and talk about the work that you're doing here in the Lowcountry. Yeah,
absolutely. So Grey, I had originally come across the project through another company here, Get Outpost and podcast, and they have a marketing agency. Great guys over there. But since then, I've started to follow Apparent Winds, which is they have a YouTube channel and is associated with your film. But without me putting words into that, could you go a little bit more in depth? What is Sea Change documentary? What is Apparent Winds? How's that all working together?
Yeah. January of 2019, Zach Buer and Trip Brower, two local guys here from Charleston, came to me with a big idea. They wanted to sail around the world, and we were looking for a way to tell that story and what stories were there for this unique opportunity that they were about to have. And just in sitting on the boat that they're currently using to sail around the world, we realized what a unique opportunity this was, because a lot of the islands and coastal communities that they would be visiting along the way are going to be fundamentally different within a very short amount of time if things continue as they are. Because between sea level rise and our changing weather patterns and the changing ecology of our oceans and coastal areas, the very natural systems that these communities derive their cultures from and rely on economically and personally are changing. And so we wanted to document that. We wanted to see what life is like for these people. And as we were researching that, we realized that a lot of these communities, like Charleston, have a conservation infrastructure, whether that's more of a citizen science-based or a nonprofit-based or more of a professional scientific base, there are a lot of communities that are taking ownership of the vital natural systems that define things like their coral reefs or their seagrass beds or their salt marshes or mangrove forests or the keystone natural systems that allow life to exist as it is and exist in a healthy way around their community and has been that way for generations. So we realized how incredible of a story that could be to see how people are working to mitigate the effects of climate change and rebuild their natural world to create a sense of resilience for us going forward. Because in the end, we wanted to tell a story about hope. We've seen enough movies and heard enough interviews and read enough content that is full of worry, despair, and warnings about the very real threats that are out there. And we wanted to find stories of people, ordinary people, trying to make a difference so that the people who watch this film, the people that we interact with, the education outreach that we're hoping to do with school children through aquariums and through my other nonprofit, Enduring Curiosity, how we can give school children and their families the opportunity to feel hopeful about their future and give them concrete tools and to be able to go out into their surrounding natural world and be able to make a difference, rebuilding it and creating greater resiliency going forward.
Yeah, no. So absolutely love all that. And a few things, I was jotting some notes down that I think it's important to cover, which frankly, I don't think a lot of people are aware of in terms of the ecosystem services and natural climate solutions that are available that we take for granted even here in the Lowcountry is all of our marshes and marshlands, and that those sequester carbon. You mentioned mangroves; those sequester a ton of carbon. So there's a lot of natural climate solutions out there, and people are rebuilding them. I know that I've done some volunteer work here locally through nonprofits like Charleston Waterkeeper and Lowcountry Land Trust, but with South Carolina DNR, where they're going in, and in addition to rebuilding oyster reefs, they're also planting Spartina grass.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a big part of what we're hoping to do here. A lot of these people we're working with are affiliated with renowned oceanographer Sylvia Earle's foundation, Mission Blue. And they operate these places that are called Hope Spots. And Hope Spots are locally managed marine protected areas or zones of interest that have specific natural systems or rare biodiversity or something about it that makes it important to that region and potentially globally. And her goal is to, by the end of this decade, have at least 30% of our world's oceans and coastal areas protected, which doesn't seem like a lot, but currently we're in single digits for protected areas. And our goal is to use this expedition, use this movie to go out and meet some of these Hope Spot ambassadors, learn what a Hope Spot is, how these other people are managing their Hope Spots, and how we can work with the conservation organizations here to build a network of educational groups, conservation organizations, federal, state, and local and municipality organizations, community groups, to have a Carolina Sea Islands Hope Spot, where we are protecting and encouraging education and resilient action in these areas so that we can maintain access and maintain healthy and responsible interaction between our communities and the natural landscapes and the the species that call this area home. And you're absolutely right. Replanting Spartina grass, planting our oyster reefs, which are huge for water control and for habitat creation and for creating nurseries for our fisheries, among a vast number of benefits, are certainly a part of that. And we're hoping to build that coalition over the next year during this pause in our filmmaking efforts due to coronavirus, and then move on and keep working with our partners here to see how we can create a resilient and engaged population for years to come.
That's great. I love that. And you have also talked about, by the way, the fact that we're in the middle of this global pandemic and the coronavirus, obviously, and how we're all having to, I think, make adjustments and frankly, be resilient during this challenging time. But how has the coronavirus affected the filming? Because the idea was the J. Henry is the boat, and they were going to sail around, circumnavigate the world, visit these hope spots, and you were going to film that and turn this into the Sea Change documentary. How has coronavirus affected the film?
Well, that's at least a two-part answer there to that question, but I'll start with the expedition, and then I'll talk about the movie. For the expedition, this is much more than just a scheduling thing. This is a life and death scenario for these guys, because they are truly isolated, which can be a positive thing in some cases, but can also be a very dangerous thing if for some reason they come into contact with coronavirus. So they're currently in the Marquesas Archipelago, which is part of French Polynesia. It's northeast of Tahiti, and that's where they arrived after a little over a 30-day passage from the Galapagos Islands back in February. And currently, Tripp, who's the captain of the boat, one of the two members of this expedition, has finally, after being anchored in place since March 13th, been allowed to come on to land because he's been quarantined on the boat for that whole time. And meanwhile, Zach, our other member of the expedition, was evacuated. He's safe, but he's been evacuated back to Charleston, where he's working to create content for y'all to watch on YouTube. But it's certainly changed the way we're approaching this on an expedition side, because we're trying to figure out, okay, how can we keep these guys safe? How can we keep the people that we meet along the way safe? How can we prevent this expedition from unintentionally being a spreading factor in this pandemic? And so that's going to be something we have to keep in mind as Tripp plans on making his way to Australia in the near future, which we hope he'll be able to do safely. But how is he going to be able to do that? What kind of quarantine restrictions are going to be in place once he gets there? Is he going to be able to stop at any of the other islands from French Polynesia to Fiji through there? Or is it going to be another straight shot? Which would be unfortunate, because I know he was very much looking forward to seeing the amazing diversity of culture and life, everything through those islands. But hopefully he'll be able to make it to Australia safely, and that's where Zach intends to rejoin him if that's possible. As far as the film goes, it has pushed out our timetable a little bit and has shifted how we're going to tell the story. Initially, the story was going to be specifically about us being with them through some of these different steps. The story begins with a TED Talk from 2009 given by Sylvia Earle that's encouraging people to go out into the world and use films and expeditions and new technology to try and tell the story of why protecting our oceans and rebuilding the natural systems that are key to them is so important to our world. And so that's our catalyst, our inciting incident right there that's propelling us out into the middle of this expedition. So now we have accidentally gotten a key factor for filmmaking, which is conflict. And having this quarantine and coronavirus and this massive disruption to not just the creation of this film or the completion of the expedition, but to life as we know it across the world, is a massive amount of conflict. And on top of that, we have people looking at the world and seeing the profound changes that are happening around us as industrial action and pollution levels and human impact on our world are scaled back in this grand experiment where skies are clearing and wildflowers and pollinators are bouncing back, and they're hearing birds in some cities in China for the first time in years. And in India, they're seeing the Himalayas from rooftops for the first time and in a generation. And Venice, you have dolphins and fish returning to crystal clear canals. And you're even seeing some changes here in the United States. And it's remarkable because it's forcing us to not only see that our world is capable of healing, but it's this other opportunity to see or to ask a big question for our world. It's do we find ways to help these natural systems continue on their way to recovering? Or do we give nature a fighting chance now that it's starting to recover? Or do we snuff that out in a second? And I think it shows what an electrified world of renewable energy and electric vehicles and dramatically lower pollution can look like, and it is an indication of what the whole premise of our story is. It's what does our future look like if we give the natural world a fighting chance to rebuild itself. I think we're getting a really unique opportunity at seeing that. And so when we resume filming, whenever it's safe to travel again, whenever it's safe to go out to visit these hope spots, again, that's going to be a big part of our focus is how have things changed since before the global lockdown, and how are these communities adapting to that? How's the natural system adapting to that? And we're going to be continuing the expedition that we intended to, but in a different way.
Yeah. So that is amazing. Hearing about, the really us giving nature a chance. I guess maybe amazing is not the word. I think it's really important to understand what is happening around the world as sort of this coronavirus has crippled us, and y'all have made you're having to make your adjustments and with the film and everything else, but also it will be incredible to see if y'all are able to film some of that, like how that's even affecting those hope spots, right? To be able to see, all right, well, they were already doing some things that were really good. Now, has this really accelerated how quickly those areas can recover, which I think will be interesting to see.
Certainly. And the hope spots are hopefully indicative of the world as a whole. We hope that they're just a small sample size of what other areas could look like as well.
Yeah, and one of the things that you said too is, how we can start to look towards, a clean energy future, renewable energy, electric vehicles, things of that nature, which are really critical in terms of solving climate change on a global scale, is to move away from fossil fuels, because that is what is causing climate change. Man-made anthropogenic climate change is burning fossil fuels. So I saw this, and I can't remember the guy's name, but it is along the same lines that what we're talking about was basically, he was saying, well, you're seeing exactly how worthless fossil fuels are if there's no consumption. They're having to pay people to take, but there's nowhere to put the oil. We have an oversupply of it, and there's zero demand for it because people aren't consuming. Mm-hmm. And so I think that poses an interesting thought: is, how much do we all, I guess, have a hand in this, and should we be rethinking the way that we do everything? And that includes how we get our energy. That includes how we get the clothes on our back, meeting our basic needs, food, clothing, shelter. And I think that's a positive that can come out of this, I think.
Certainly. And the end that we envisioned for the film is the expedition returning to Charleston with this new information, with these tools by which our community, directly in the film signifying Charleston, but in a more metaphorical sense representing the world, can begin to have a systems change in how we begin to work. And I think that's going to become more and more of our focus. Is it's not just going to be on the education. When we get to the end of the story, we're actually at the beginning of a new opportunity, because our global system, the way we live, has been so incredibly disrupted that we've got a unique opportunity to build something new out of that. And I think the individual has a big part that they can play in that, because while it's certainly going to take the actions of our federal governments and of our local and state governments to institute or push forward some of these changes, I think we as stewards of our communities, stewards of our natural environment, and as consumers will be able to have a pretty big say in what life looks like on the other side of this.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, and I think that's hopefully a really strong message that anyone listening takes away, is that the individual can make a difference. But to your point, in order to scale, I think what is necessary, you do need participation from government, and so it's on the policy front. And so anyway, it's just a random point. I've learned a lot doing these interviews with different people, and that was a key takeaway from one of the interviews that I've done. They said, yes, the individual can certainly make a difference, and everyone should be trying to make an impact, at the same time influencing our elected officials to act on climate change, because they can accelerate our transition through policy.
Definitely. The resources that can come to bear are just an order of magnitude higher if we can get federal or state institutions involved. That's And that, a lot of that just comes from them seeing the trends happening. So it could either start at the top or it could start from grassroots, but there needs to be momentum one way or the other.
Yep. Well, great. So let's learn a little bit more about you. So this is So what is your how did you get into filmmaking? What's your background? Where are you from? Let's do the who is Grey? How did you get here?
Well, I'm a Charleston native, born and raised, and have just moved back here full time to work on sea change and building the Carolina Sea Island Hope Spot, and my education through media, nonprofit, and Enduring Curiosity. I've come back here because there's so much potential and there's so many stories that I want to tell that have to do with the Lowcountry. I'm fascinated by history and by culture and the way the world around us and the stories that we tell help to define who we are and what we're going to do. And so I started my path towards filmmaking at the College of William and Mary in Virginia as a history major, but I also studied theater and cultural anthropology and music anthropology there to learn kind of how stories work and what are some stories that I could tell. And from there came to Trident Technical College in Charleston and did about a year of technical study in film production there before getting my master's degree at the Savannah College of Art and Design, where I graduated a couple years ago. Nice. In producing and directing there. And since then, I've worked freelance and then have recently moved over to having my own production company. And I've got a few different projects going on right now. Sea Change is the big one, which I'm thrilled about, and got a couple of smaller ones that are loosely connected to that. One of them is about a rare species of a flowering tea tree family plant named after Benjamin Franklin. It's called Franklinia, and it only lived in a small stretch of the Altamaha River in coastal Georgia. And this was back in the 18th century. And William Bartram, who's the founder of, or who's the son of John Bartram, major naturalists here in the United States, found this when he was doing an exploration or expedition down there to try and find rare plants to sell to England, and came across this remarkable species of flowering tree and brought it home, planted it in his garden. And by the 1820s, the only survivors of this species were either living in his garden or were descendants of those species that were living in his garden.
Wow, and that's super interesting.
Yeah, and currently the University of Georgia are trying to bring back the species and see if they can reintroduce it, because a microorganism called Phytophthora is now living in a lot of our coastal soil, and that causes something called root rot. And root rot is a problem for chestnut, for rhododendron, for Franklinia, and for a lot of our other woody shrubs and trees here in the Southeast. And so if she can find a way, if Heather Gladfelter, who's the lead on that, can find a way to make these plants Phytophthora resistant, then we might get a chance to return a technically extinct species to its natural habitat in coastal Georgia.
Wow, that's super cool. And so one of the things, by the way, I'll just have to give because it sounds like we're both sons of the Lowcountry. I was, and you said you went to SCAD, so I was born and raised in Savannah. So I love that you're sort of focusing a lot of these efforts to our neck of the woods, which I am equally as fascinated with the history, as well as the environmental conservation side of where we live, which I think are stories that don't get as much attention. Then I don't know, than the glaciers melting in Montana, for example, when it comes to climate change.
Definitely. And you've got big stories and you've got more regional stories, and sometimes the regional stories become more universal than we're aware of.
Yeah. And so I'll just say this, because I think, you're very much involved in the storytelling component of this. But I'll also just talk about a little, what are we seeing here in the Lowcountry from a climate change front, and the things that I think that we see here in Charleston a lot as more flooding as a result of sea level rise. Mm-hmm. But also, more intense hurricanes and storms.
Flooding is a real issue. And I think we have a unique opportunity to look at other flood mitigation opportunities that are maybe natural examples. Our marsh grass ecosystems are really good at dealing with floodwaters. And so how can we build green walls, green natural sinks for not just our carbon, but for our water, instead of building hard gray structures. So instead of building a giant seawall, how can we find a way to use a natural system that can benefit the harbor as a whole, instead of putting up a wall that's only going to create more erosion over time?
Yeah. Yeah, I absolutely, and I know that's a big topic right now in Charleston is how to address the flooding. It comes up every election cycle, whether it's with the mayor or local elected officials. Is what are we going to do about flooding here? Because it is increasingly every year there's more flooding. I have noticed as an angler who I fish the flood tides for redfish a lot, pretty consistently. If I look at the tide chart, so for anyone listening to this who's not aware, in Charleston, we have about an average tidal swing of 5 feet. When there's full moons and new moons, we get what's called a flood tide, and that's when you go fish for tailing redfish. And if the tide chart is calling for like a 5'9" or a 6 foot tide, I started noticing this last year. They were always higher than, because you get used to like certain flats, like, or at least I do, because I just have a kayak, so I kayak to a lot of the same flats, and I'll know when the right tides are at certain flats for like the perfect size flood that I'm looking for redfish. And for one particular flat, it was a 5'9" was like ideal. Well, I've also fished them where they're 6'4" or 6'5", and that's what I was seeing when the tide chart was saying a 5'9". So if that wasn't too confusing, basically the tides are bigger than what the tide charts are predicting them to be. And I think, you could say some of that's wind, but I think it happened consistently enough to rule wind out, and that we're getting bigger tides in general, which I would attribute to sea level rise, which is kind of interesting. But I've talked to other friends of mine who fish, and everyone's kind of had similar experiences. They're like, yeah, the tides just seem to be a little bit bigger than what they're forecasting when you get used to fishing certain areas and know when the right tides are.
Oh yeah, certainly. And we're going to have to look at all those wonderfully placed lots that are right there waterfront. Yeah. How viable are those? How viable is living right on a creek without any trees or shrubs or marsh in front of that? That's going to be a big conversation that people are going to need to have on an individual basis, and I'm sure the insurance companies are already talking about right now with the threat of storms becoming greater for us here. But going back to fishing and redfish for a moment, we also need to look at how can we allow the marshes and the places that are the nurseries for these fish that we rely on for recreation and for the seafood industry to continue to thrive and to be even more abundant. So that's something I look forward to working with Waterkeeper and the Department of Natural Resources and the aquarium, among others, to see what they're hoping to do to keep our marshes ahead of the rising seas, because as the water moves up, the marsh is going to have to advance either inland or become shallower, because it has a certain depth that it can realistically survive in.
Interesting. And that's something that I quite honestly haven't thought about, the marsh having to change and adapt, other than I know that I think it's like something like globally half of all marshlands have disappeared. I might be slightly off on that.
It's even more than that, actually. It's I've seen it as high as 3/4 of all coastal marshes are gone, and even more than that for coastal shellfish reefs. But we've actually done really, really well here in the Southeast. We have some of the healthiest marsh and shellfish reef ecosystems in the world.
Interesting. And that's another big thing too. When I was living in Savannah, that I had gotten involved with and have continued to do here, it was with the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, and South Carolina DNR does it here as well. But rebuilding those oyster reefs, which I know we mentioned earlier, but through that process and learning about that, and you might know this better than I do, but it's my understanding that on the East Coast of the United States, it's something compared to where they were historically, like a couple hundred years ago. Oysters are 90% of them are gone.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's pretty wild. And when you think about all the benefits that you get from oysters, and not just cleaning the water and enhancing the fishery, but also keeping, like, as we're talking about marshland disappearing, well, hey, if there's oyster built up, it can help to prevent some of that marsh from eroding to begin with, I think. And, I don't know if that's a natural solution for that, building of a wall like we talked about earlier, but it could be part of that solution.
It absolutely is, and that's something that's being looked at. The living shoreline concept has been talked about for at least a decade now, but for anyone who's interested in learning more about natural solutions to coastal erosion control and coastal storm surge mitigation, living shorelines are a fascinating thing to look at. And that plays into a larger conversation that's been going on since I think it was the 60s or 70s with Orrin Pilkey, who is a brilliant coastal geologist who's been writing about longshore drift and the idea of our coastal sea islands being a part of this massive living, not animate living, but active system that constantly feeds and rebuilds itself and moves in and out from the coast over massive scales of time based on the height of the ocean and the continued access to sediments moving along our coast. And one of the things that he's been writing about for decades is the real problem with having physical barriers, hard surfaces trying to catch sand because you're robbing the next island down and the next island down from that. So, and the idea that building on islands is ludicrous because there's no reason to believe that anything but the maritime forest that is in the center of the island is a good place to be. So Dewey's is actually a really good example of living in a maritime forest in a coastal area because they're taking full advantage of the erosion control, the protection from storm surge, and the ecosystem and the natural system that is there that protects that island. And so they might be a little bit more resilient than other islands that have cut down all of their dune ecosystems, all the shrub grass, all the bushes, and then the trees that are there that are meant to trap sand. And so when the storm surge comes across and takes down the dunes as it's supposed to, it doesn't just then have a clear path all the way across the island. It's that energy is being broken up by a living wall in this living shoreline as it's moving through a variety of ecosystems towards the tidal creeks in the back.
Interesting. And that makes sense, right? They're called barrier islands for a reason. Mm-hmm. And now you think, hindsight's 2020, of course, but you think, the beach in Savannah, Tybee Island, and certainly on Folly Beach, and, the amount of money they're spending in trying to keep that shoreline in place to protect the houses, and I'm sure every coastal barrier island is doing that, right? Trying to protect people's homes, but it's unnatural. It's not, so it's not supposed to be that way. If you were, as you said, if you were in the middle of that maritime forest, the coast could do its thing and you wouldn't have to worry about it as much.
Yeah. And barrier islands aren't meant to be permanent structures either. They're there to be energy buffers for the coastline. And so they're only going to be, I guess geologic time is different than human time. So we don't necessarily have to worry about it. So somebody can live their whole life in a barrier island in it, but we're living in a more dynamic time now where sea levels are probably going to rise at a more elevated rate than we might have seen in the near past. And so that's going to become a question of how do is there going to be a retreat from areas that are watersheds? Or are we going to have to retreat from coastal areas? And that's a completely different conversation that far more qualified people than me could spend hours talking about. But it's all a part of this larger coastal system that we live in, that we're only a small part of, and that we have a responsibility to be a positive member in, because we have the capability of engineering natural solutions and natural benefits, but we also have the potential to do very human-focused measures that can be disruptive, destructive, and devastating to the rest of our system by either removing specific elements from it or disrupting the chain that supports the entire natural system. And if we cause these natural systems to collapse, then we're going to lose the things that we love and that we rely on here anyway.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Well, let me. I don't know if you've heard of this book, Grey, but if you haven't, you should definitely check it out. And they have this on their website too, because what I'm thinking is I do want to shift gears just a little bit. And I know that is the focus of your film, and talk about being hopeful. In terms of, which is something that I try and do in all of my podcast, is talk about these stories that inspire, because as you mentioned earlier, you get clubbed over the head with the stuff, and it can get downright depressing. So one of these books that I recommend to anyone, I don't know if you've seen this, but it's called Project Drawdown. And it's 100 solutions to solve global warming. And so that's something and they have every solution listed on their website, and now they're coming out with an annual report. But for anyone, while we're waiting on the Sea Change film to make it to the big screens, that's something that I think I've found a lot of hope in. I don't know if you've heard about this project or not, but it's really interesting, and a lot of them are the natural climate solutions that we're talking about, and also things that you wouldn't have suspected, such as educating women in third world countries and things of that nature. So if you haven't seen that, I recommend checking that out. But anyone listening, I think they have their own websites like Project Drawdown or drawdown.org, something like that. But anyway, worth checking out if you're looking for some hope.
Definitely. And I encourage your listeners to go out and look for nonprofits, look for organizations that are making these things happen, or helping communities make these things happen, because having those resources available is such a key element for so many of these communities to be able to make the constructive choice, the long-term choice, to be able to shift the way their systems work, or to shift away from a nearer-term answer, to be able to create the kind of constructive change that we need to do on a global scale. A great example of that is the Eden Reforestation Project. They work with communities around the world to plant mangroves and other trees, and they hire people out of those communities to be managers of these forests and to plant. And by doing that, they are rebuilding that economy by giving people a stable income, and they're also rebuilding their ecology. They're rebuilding their forests. They're changing the climate in some cases, because if you take an arid area or a hot area and you put a bunch of tree cover, you cool it down, you create more moisture, you create better soil in the long term. And there are other organizations that are working on rebuilding the microbial life in our soil, which is going to be a huge part of carbon sequestration and the creation of more vibrant ecosystems. That's a big part of our natural climate solution is the tiny little things that we take for granted and that we don't really think about in our soil and our oceans, that are the building blocks of everything. And so if people are looking for organizations to support, or looking for educational opportunities out there, I highly recommend they take advantage of this time that we're cooped up inside, to find new passions, or to find new opportunities to learn about their area. So as soon as we're safely allowed to go back outside, we can go and can have a constructive relationship with the world around us, and we can be a more educated participant in our community.
That's awesome. Well, great. Let me ask you this: Are there where can people find out more information about the film and apparent wins, so that they can help support y'all's work and stay in touch?
We've got websites for both. If you search Apparent Wins, you can find their full gallery of media content. They've got an awesome satellite tracker that on their website, so they can post blogs and post images through there, and you can see where they are in the world and can follow their progress. Follow its progress on if you search Sea Change documentary, you can find our website there. We have Instagram channels for both of these entities, and we also have the Apparent Winds YouTube channel. I think every Wednesday they have a new episode coming up that Zach is hard at work editing, and Trip is hard at work shooting new content overseas. And neither of these guys are trained filmmakers, so it's pure, authentic storytelling from their perspective as they're looking to share their experiences with you.
I love that. And if there's somewhere, and this is just out of my own personal curiosity, because you seem to have your finger on a lot of good information, especially about here in the Lowcountry on climate change. You mentioned some nonprofits, or is there any other resources that you want to throw out there for folks looking to find information, whether it's books, websites, nonprofits, to look for more information on climate resiliency and climate change here in the Lowcountry?
Well, the South Carolina Aquarium is the place to go. They have an incredible website, and with just stocked full of resources for people, whether it's a teacher who wants to create lesson plans for the students in their classroom, or it's an interested adult or interested child who wants to go and learn on their own. There's a lot of content there to learn about our specific region through that. I recommend following Lowcountry Land Trust, the Coastal Conservation League, Charleston Waterkeeper, Friends of Coastal South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, and then just spread out through the web of all the different people they're working with. We're going to be building a website in over the next year to aggregate all of these different organizations that are going to be part of the Lowcountry Sea Island Hope Spot. We're going to bring together all of them in one place with an easy to find set of information about the specific work that these groups are doing and how they're hoping to work together going forward in that. But they all are doing a wonderful job in education and outreach right now through their websites, through their Instagram channels, their Twitter accounts, the full social media array that they all have. But especially right now, we need to be learning from and supporting our local aquarium more than ever, because they rely on their education outreach opportunities and their visitors to not only continue to provide the valuable services that they do for our community and for our bioregion, but also to keep all of these amazing creatures that we can learn from alive, and to keep the Sea Turtle Hospital going, which is one of our great assets here in the Lowcountry. So I recommend people going and learning from and supporting the South Carolina Aquarium however they can.
Yeah, I will second that. Our daughter is 19 months old now, and we have our annual pass, and it is our go-to rainy day spot when we're not in quarantine. But it really is amazing, the aquarium in and of itself, but then also what they do to benefit us all here in South Carolina with the education and resources that they provide.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're great people, and we hope to continue working with them with the efforts that they continue to offer for all of us.
Awesome. Well, so everyone out there, stay current with Sea Change. Just search Sea Change documentary. Their website, if you want to go straight to it, is seachange-film.com. Check out Apparent Winds on YouTube. Make sure you're following these guys on Instagram and on social, and do what you can to support their mission in this project. So, Grey, I really appreciate you carving some time out for me today, and I'm looking forward to following Bill's journey.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks for tuning in to The Sustainable Angler. Special thanks to Grey for joining me on the podcast today. You can find The Sustainable Angler anywhere you listen to podcasts, whether that's iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher. And if you like what you're hearing, don't forget to leave us a rating and review. Give us a follow or a like. That helps us out a lot. Thanks, and have a great day.